in 1883, there's a novel published called Treasure Island, which is still used for inspiration for certain things today. It was a exciting but romanticized vision of pirates, roughly about 80 to 100 years before, during the golden age of piracy. Today's talk is not about piracy, but it's making a point here. It was written by Robert Louis Stevenson. And anyone's not read it has missed something. I recommend it. Now, some of the elements in it are based on reality, though much of it is by the imagination of the author. Now, when I say it's inspired more recent entertainment, anyone that's watched the streaming popular drama series called Black Sails will understand that it's a prequel to it in many ways. Although the original was written for children, and Black Sails is certainly not a children's story on so many different levels, even by today's standards. But yeah, a lot of the characters in there mentioned in Black Sails are in Treasure Island. Now the point is, it was an adventure story. It was written for entertainment. It wasn't meant to be factual. I know where a lot of the other facts came from, and yeah, I could fill up 2 podcasts with that. Pirates are fascinating characters, fictional or otherwise. But in more, okay, so that's a deliberately fictionalized story of some people that existed, or in essence existed. Now, we lived in a time now, in more recent times, there's been criticism against other works, which are more directly based on history, but may not always stand up to precise scrutiny. Okay. I mean, yeah, this mainly films now. Yeah, I mean, there are novels written based on historical facts. I think the Americans called it faction. And normally we understand it is. Possibly the last book I can think of that really caused a lot of discussion was the Da Vinci Code. Yeah, which presented mythology and myths and half-truths as absolute facts. But the author never meant it to be like that, supposedly. Yeah. And again, that was based on a book just before it, which presented a lot of peculiar things as facts. Okay. I mean, when we look at it more recent times, now there's a film that was out 20 or so years ago called Gladiator, which is a new sequel coming out to it. Excellent film in many ways, technically good. A lot of research was done for it. But that has a few minor facts that the makers knew were not necessarily true. One of them was that the Romans didn't have spurs, or didn't have a sorry, I've just forgotten the term of it, to control their feet for the on the horses. But I think that was put sorry, stirrups. That's it. Yes, stirrups. Yeah, and yeah, maybe not, but I think that's put them in for health and safety reasons on the film. Yeah, because I mean, okay, you can probably do a straight ride, but the way they were turning horses, you got to remember they turned horses quite on a slow turning circle in the film, because yeah, horses actually take a while to turn around. Anyone, I mean, somebody could correct me here, but I did partly grow up around horses and know that they can't actually turn like that normally. They don't do that naturally themselves. The other thing was that the thumbs down was used in the gladiatorial games to signal dispatch participant. Again, this wasn't used, but the makers knew that they weren't going to start confusing people. They went with what is tradition. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the film was for entertainment, which we understand, but it actually made people question things, which was good. Yeah, still a cracking good film on so many different levels. I'm now going to touch on a war film. Now, I'm only using these as examples. There's plenty of other films as I go through, which, yeah, we could all say this and that was, yeah. I'm using as examples. A Bridge Too Far, which was about the Operation Market Garden, yeah, where the Allied troops basically dropped into behind enemy lines, got the position correctly in totally wrong. Basically, we're surrounded by, I'm going to use German forces. I'm not going to use Nazis, German forces. Everyone was doing a job there. Now, the monologue to the film at the beginning states that at that time, the Germans were still winning the war. In effect, at that point in 1943, they were not. They'd taken basically a hammering from Russia on the Eastern Front. They'd been pushed out of North Africa. In no sense of the word terms could you say they were winning the war at that time. If anything, it was a draw, but they had taken significant losses, both territorially and with personnel. So yeah, but that again was a statement, inaccurate at the beginning, but for dramatic effect. Look at this, you know. Operation Market Garden, although it was an Allied failure, still always characterized, certainly as I was growing up, as still a glorified Allied effort. I'm just going to look at The Untouchables now, a film about the America in the 1930s, the US. We tend not to use America when we're in Brazil because the Americas is a bigger region for us. This was based partly on a book that Eliot Ness wrote, who was the main character in the film. Again, there were questions about the novel. I've read it. It's a dramatization, although it's written by the person who's possibly there. He did it as a money-making exercise. I mean, the guy by that point, I believe, had 3 wives, etc. You know, so yeah. Although he's shown in the film as having a wife and family, he didn't at that point. He was still living with his parents. So, which I find quite interesting. In the film, which was the core of the whole film, it says that drinking alcohol beverages was illegal. The strange thing is about prohibition, from my reading and understanding, was that drinking alcohol itself was not illegal. It would be unenforceable. What was actually illegal was the manufacturing, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. In other words, you're cutting the salt off. People still had drink in their house that, you know, was from before. So if you had really had alcohol before January the 6th, 1920, you could, people did continue to drink it privately. Yeah. It was just really, yeah, to stop it being distributed. Hopefully, yeah, the supplies would dry out eventually, so to speak. And yeah, those that wanted the law in would, yeah, have got their case, won their battle, as it were. Yeah, I mean, it was a restriction on people's liberties. There are reasons why it was done. But again, yeah, actually, sometimes people do things for the right reasons without thinking of consequences. What prohibition did, it actually allowed criminals to actually create a very, very lucrative revenue stream, which is really what the film was about. Yeah, it's interesting what they actually got the perpetrators on in the end. They couldn't really get them directly. The actual film shows a lot of violence in it. Not a lot, but yeah. Actually, it's probably overplayed on the violent side of it all, certainly between the police and the gangsters. There was violence, don't get me wrong. I mean, yeah, but there was a lot of corruption as well. Yeah, I mean, so yeah. And certain characters were killed off in it, where the guy who was chucked off the top of a building, he was actually in prison when that was supposed, when the film showed that as happening to him. He actually was released about 6 months after Capone was imprisoned and basically took his own life. Yeah, he was finished. that point, and he wasn't in a world where you could exactly go out and get another job. I'm going to come up to more recent times in the past few years. Some years ago, there was a film called The Imitation Game about the breaking of the Enigma code by British intelligence. That was true itself, although the Americans made a film where they actually did it. Yeah, The Imitation Game was actually true, and Alan Turing was responsible or leading, one of the leaders in actually breaking it. Incredible piece of, if you like, detective work in effect. There's one scene in it that always sticks out in my mind, where they're sitting in an office or in a room at Bletchley, and they decide not to tell British intelligence about a certain thing they managed to crack a code on. Yeah, in case it would lead to the discovery that the Allies or the British had actually cracked the code. In reality, it would not be their decision to do that. Their job was to report absolutely everything. The decision whether or not to actually act upon the information, the intelligence, would have been taken at a much higher level. The reality is that when you don't act upon intelligence, it can cost people their lives. But the bigger gain would be, not letting on the fact you knew what the Germans were going to be doing. So I just found that an interesting aspect of the film that somebody brought up with me. Yeah, it was a big responsibility. Turing and his team would not have made that decision. That would be made a higher decision. We probably wouldn't even. I've tried to find out who made these decisions. There's lots of decisions that made in World War II that actually caused civilian deaths across the country as well, to protect military assets. So again, that's an interesting thing. Who would want that burden? It's difficult to actually find out who actually made the ultimate decisions. And really, really coming up to date, probably the last 10, 15 years, there was a TV series called Vikings, which I enjoyed. Did play fast and loose with history and a lot of reasons. It portrayed some characters in there called shield maidens. That's almost factual. The existence of female warriors hasn't been proven one way or another historically. That's a great idea. I mean, I like the character Lagertha myself. Thought she was great, and the girls around her. But again, the Vikings were very, very progressive with their views towards women. Women could be leaders almost. I mean, another character in Vikings was actually a female Jar. Okay, whether or not there are female Jars of her power or not is interesting. It's possible, but women were held in very high esteem by the Vikings. Their own women, that is. If you happen to be a woman in a place or attacking, you might not be so well treated. Another interesting point, well, I've just mentioned the Jar. The Jar in the Vikings may have been a male. It would have been very unlikely that the character, male or female, would have been black. Although the actress and singer that actually portrayed her did very well. I mean, I've got no objection to it in itself. But this brings me on to it. My question to you, Steve, is, given our more recent knowledge and ideas and everything else, should more attention be paid to having accuracy in modern entertainment, or should we just regard it as what it is, entertainment, not take it too seriously, and just run with it? Because when you look online, there's so many people nitpicking now online, questioning, and generally criticizing, which otherwise are reasonably good productions. So Over to you, Steve.
You'd accept a novel as being that, a
Mm,
novel.
mm,
You should accept a film as being that, it's a film. It's a
yeah.
dramatization. Um, when you come, don't forget, especially when you're talking about films,
Mm,
excuse me, you've got 90 minutes to put in
mm,
something. You've got to condense something down
yeah.
that took
Yeah.
4 years, 5 years
Mm,
to 90 minutes.
yeah.
And so you have to abridge a
Mm,
lot
oh, yeah.
when you're when you're making your film or writing your book. The
Yeah.
book, not so much, because a book can be 10 pages long, it can be 1,000 pages
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
Depends
That's
on how much detail you want to put in there.
mm,
One of the most famous films that watched, um, based on true documented history,
yeah.
albeit not necessarily the truth, was Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Mm,
where the characters were based on people who had actually claimed they
mm,
encountered, or they were abducted, or their relatives were abducted, and and it was based around those people. There's a guy who worked at NASA. I forget his name now, but he was involved in the film,
yeah.
and he was the advisor, if you like, of the film.
Mm,
Of how to. Of course, the characters wouldn't be exactly the same, and if you told each story in turn, the film would have to be something like 3 weeks long,
yeah. Of course. Yeah.
because the things that happened didn't happen, you know,
Yeah.
all at the same time.
Mm,
It was 1 year later, 2 years later, then the next thing happened, and then 3 years later, the next thing happened in
yeah.
real life, I say.
Mm,
So you can't wait for these, if you want to go real
yeah.
history buff, really, then
Yeah.
your film's going to be really long and also extremely boring, because the
Yeah.
rest of the time it'll be their mundane day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, in terms of your the prohibition,
Mm,
you mentioned, what the law is in prohibition.
mm,
Well, look, you just need to know it's illegal,
yeah.
right? And you just condense it down to it's illegal.
Yeah.
If you try and explain to somebody the ins and outs of a law
Mm,
in a film, it's going to get very tedious,
yeah. Yeah.
because the film isn't about the law,
No.
as you said. It was about how people tried to get around the law. It was
Yeah.
about how fought to keep their turf.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, it's going to be more violent than real life.
Mm.
However, killing somebody in real life
Well,
is
no, I'm not.
gruesome,
Yeah. I wasn't. I
right?
wasn't
But
dismissing it. Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
but I mean, these fights and the fisticuffs and
Mm,
people rolling over tables and this sort of thing, I've never seen that happen in a real
no.
life.
No.
People rolling over a table and getting up and going back in for the kill. Uh, it's for
Yeah.
dramatic effect.
Obviously. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
So, and that's how it should be accepted.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's one scene where the Sean Connery uh, character um, had picked up a dead body, to make a point. Um, it's very,
Have you
very
tried picking up a dead body?
well. I've never done it personally, but I imagine I've picked up somebody who's been or tried not unconscious, but you had to remove somebody before who was. Yeah,
They're very heavy.
Yeah, I'm not small. I'm not a small guy, but yeah, as you know, but yeah, yeah, it takes two people normally. Yeah, things like that. I mean, okay, I think they call it anachronisms in films. Yeah, it's things like that. Um,
Because they want to send a message.
yeah,
And if,
that's it.
if they can do it in any way they can, if they have
Mm,
to use one person, they'll use one person.
yeah,
But the message is, if Sean Connery was showing the corpse saying, he killed my brother, or
Yeah.
or this is what happens to you if you do something naughty.
Yeah.
If they've got one person or five people holding the supposed corpse up,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the same message.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So why use one? Why use five when you can use one?
well,
You know,
that's the point. It's Hollywood magic, what's film magic. But yeah, it's a yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about condensing because sometimes, obviously, if it's a factual film, they'd sometimes condense five, six characters into one person as well, just for yeah,
of course, of course.
because yeah, it can be yeah, and even change names if they sound too much like another character or same characters' names. But yeah, it's yeah, it's just always interesting. Yeah, I've seen more and more criticism come through now on things. I mean, I like films, yeah, but yeah, okay. But
You've got to be a serious nerd to nitpicking in a film.
yeah,
You've got to be, I mean, I can understand it if somebody says that Roman centurion's wearing a wristwatch, that I can accept.
well, yeah,
But for them to say, well, that's this Roman centurion, his skirt is an inch higher than what it should be.
yeah,
And they never wore them like that. In fact, they were hammered out and the
yeah,
bronze
yeah,
in the
yeah. I
bronze
know.
age.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then you go. Yeah,
yeah,
it's got to be really nerdy to do that. You
yeah.
know,
People do it.
um,
It's interesting. It's educational, but yeah, it's not. Yeah,
Not really, because you're trying to take away from the film.
mm,
You're trying to take away from the story of the film, and
yeah.
that's what they are. Films are stories,
Well,
even based on true stories.
yeah. I mean,
It's a version of what
yeah.
that story was.
I mean, yeah. Very often you see based on true events or real events. Yeah, which is a bit of honesty there. What I like about these films is it does generate interest in things, and people go off and find out, yeah, where things
I'll,
might be.
I'll I'll be I'll be quite honest with you. The last three films you mentioned, I haven't watched.
Well,
Didn't even know they existed.
well, I mean, I was,
You know,
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, I know
I
with
don't know.
you.
I don't know if they were blockbusters. I don't know.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
not really. I'm not really a film
no, they are,
addict.
yeah, I mean, they were successful films. Yeah, well, successful, but that's why I bought them in on this. Yeah, I've watched other films which probably, as you say, the geeks or the nerds might know about, you know, which were based on
Yeah,
things. Yeah,
if you want one that's interesting about gangbangers, I don't know if you remember from the 70s, Warriors, the film
mm,
Warriors,
yeah,
and all it basically was somebody in somebody else's turf trying to get back to their turf,
yeah,
right? Because they were accused of killing somebody, Cyrus,
yeah,
this huge gang leader.
mm,
And their trials and tribulations, and of course that was over dramatized for the violence, because I
yeah,
don't believe that it's every corner you turn you're going to meet somebody who's going to kick your head in, because if that was the case, then gang warfare this day and age, every day
yeah,
they'd turn a corner and they'd see somebody who they can is gonna, and it isn't like that. It's like once a week, or
yeah.
if you're unlucky.
So
If you
what
go
you
to
say?
going down to Sainsbury's and all of a sudden you put your toe in somebody else's turf, and all of a sudden there's a riot
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
It-
yeah. I was going to say you're saying it's in the US. It's not Manchester in the UK. Well, yeah, I'm joking a bit. Yeah, but yeah, but,
no, but I mean,
yeah,
it's because I mean the film Warriors.
yeah,
What was it about? It's trying to promote gang culture,
yeah,
and it's good versus bad once again,
yeah,
telling the truth against about lying.
yeah.
And the liar, the guy at the end, the guy he got his just
Oh yeah,
deserts,
yeah. That
as he was
happens in
killed
life
by this
always.
by
Yeah,
was
yeah,
killed by this mob, you know. But
yeah,
like I said, it's a drama. It should be accepted as that.
yeah, yeah.
The fighting's going to be a little bit more, um, just as in most kung fu films. The fighting's got to be more spectacular than what it really is.
Well, you and I both
Um,
know if you hit someone, your knuckles are hurting on the first hit, let alone if you're going to do it
well,
multiple
not
times.
necessarily. It
Well,
depends. You know, I used to
yeah,
practice kung fu, and
yeah.
it's
No,
not
no.
as wushu is.
Mm,
Wushu's quite athletic, but
yeah,
kung fu not really. Not really.
no.
It's
Blocking
quite
more.
thin.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
still protect yourself, but you know,
Mm,
it isn't a Jackie Chan
no.
sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? World War II decisions being made that killed a lot of innocent people. Yeah,
Mm, mm,
even the fantastic Dambusters film.
mm. Yeah,
You know, the Germans that I think it was in Germany where they
yeah,
burst the dam. Yeah, everybody who lived below the dam, that was it.
yeah.
Yes, you know.
Well,
The idea was to flood the place out, and that's what they did.
we'll take out industry. Well, mainly people working there, but yeah, the people. It was a. I mean, yeah, that was a decision that was made in militarily. This the decisions I'm talking about could have cost people of your own forces their lives.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
if you don't
yeah,
act
yeah,
on
yeah.
intelligence on things, yeah,
Yeah. The Gulf of Tonkin incident,
mm,
uh, I think there were warnings about. I think there were warnings about Pearl Harbor, to be quite honest,
yeah, oh no, that,
when it happened.
yeah,
And they just left the people there
you,
to die.
no, the conspiracy theories about that, yes,
Yeah.
found,
And who made the decision in the Enigma code that you were talking about?
yeah,
You're saying that one of the characters wouldn't have made that decision.
mm,
But once again, to put in the film of him
yeah,
phoning up, going up the chain of command,
oh
and
yeah,
then the decision to come back down the chain of command
oh yeah,
instead,
yeah.
it's just
Well,
it's just as sometimes too much information.
yeah, ultimately it's a human story. It's not about.
Less is more. I think less is more. I think the phrase is,
Yeah,
you
yeah. I
know.
mean, I'm using it to illustrate a point here. I mean, yeah,
was-
okay, yeah,
yeah. And also the most recent one you
yeah,
were on about the Nordic people,
yeah,
the Vikings, and a
yeah,
black girl played one of the roles in the
mm,
Vikings.
yeah,
It's called DEI, sir, and that's the most putting actors of minorities, fitting them in a film somewhere. I
yeah.
don't I don't think back in the day in the Vikings there were all that many black leaders
I mean,
in in their in their ranks and files.
no, I mean they would have been aware of different cultures the Vikings being explored as they were, but they certainly, I
Well, I don't think I'm not too sure if they knew about the African culture or the Caribbean culture.
would be
You know,
a little bit pushing pushing credibility a bit. Yes, yeah.
well they
I mean. In fairness, they did use a Swedish actress. She was a black Swedish actress, so it wasn't.
still minority.
Yeah,
That's
it's
even more minority. She's Swedish.
yeah. Well, yeah, but yeah. I mean, actually, I mean, she came on. I mean, I must admit, you did forget. You did forget, actually. Yeah, she played the part well. I've got no criticism of the way she played it at all. I mean, apart from the fact that
No,
the Joel Harkin was probably, if he did exist, probably a male as well. But
yeah.
hey,
I think in that instance the director or the producers they did that to prove a point more than to prove a
no,
political point
no,
more than to tell a story.
yeah. I mean,
The fact. I mean, I've not seen the series,
no,
so
but
I've not really much idea of what you're on about.
yeah,
However, the thesis
mm,
that it's about Viking history and
mm,
and where the series could be
yeah,
um, coming away a little bit from the what the history books tell us.
yeah,
I think that was probably more of a
mm,
a modern political point that the producers were trying to
yeah.
make.
I mean, there are other facts in there. They played around with history timelines and all that for reasons of
Yeah,
yeah,
well, well,
yeah,
I mean, if you're going to talk about Vikings,
yeah.
it's not yesterday.
No,
So
yeah,
you can change timelines around like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. You can do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
You
Oh
you
no,
can change. two or three generations.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't that era in general,
Mm.
you know, wasn't just over like 10 years or 20
No.
years.
Yeah.
You know,
Thankfully, they didn't have them running around with horns on their helmets or things like that, which is a Victorian invention. But
well,
so they got that right.
see, if
Um,
I was producing the film, I would have made them do that.
it's just-
Uh,
I think,
You,
I
you,
think,
you're telling me something now I didn't know.
yeah, I think ceremonially they probably had things like that. But yeah, it wouldn't be very practical in a battle. You know, the first thing you could do is hold them like that. Or the idea of a helmet is to glance off a blade.
I have no
Yeah,
idea. I
but
wasn't there.
no, well, none of us were. I mean, this is it. You can play around with history a bit, and yeah, and have a
I
bit of
think they
fun
do.
with
It's
it.
called artistic license.
Yeah,
Let,
yeah,
let them, as long as they're not lying, as
yeah,
long as it's a very blatant lie, and to try and prove a modern political point,
mm,
then as long as the story's more or less, you got to
yeah.
accept got artistic license. You've got to accept that they need to abridge
Well,
certain details to make the thing flow a little bit better.
yeah. I
And
mean,
like I said, they've got to
yeah,
condense what was 3 or 4, 5, 6 years of
yeah,
time span into 90 minutes. How do you
yeah,
do that? So,
yeah. I mean, the other thing is obviously the big thing is language. If we went back even probably 200 years back to the UK in England, sorry, UK, we probably would seem weird to the people there, the way we speak,
yeah, of
etc.
course, that's why it's so important to keep Shakespeare in its original format
Mm,
because
yeah,
that uses the old
yeah,
English.
yeah. And yeah, I mean, despite
And,
what
and you don't, sorry, sorry, you don't even have to go back 300, 400 years.
yeah,
You go back to the turn of the last century.
yeah,
People spoke in a completely different way.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I
And
had
I
to
think
just
people these days are speaking differently than what I did when I was a kid.
yeah.
Just
Well, yeah. Yeah. Yorkshire's fun now. But yes, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yes, it's yeah. I mean, I probably use expressions that you balk at, and yeah, yeah. I mean, you try and keep with it. I mean, we have a lot now coming through. I mean, we had a discussion yesterday. I had a discussion with some fellow people in my own industry,
yeah.
the educational industry,
Mm.
about this. Funny enough, yeah, I was planning a podcast on it maybe in the future, but yeah, how far back would you have to go before you wouldn't understand anything? I mean, yeah, we talk about the Vikings. The Vikings and the Saxons would have understood each other vaguely, probably a bit like an Italian talking to a Portuguese person. Um, um, English at the time, if we went back to that time, trying to understand what we called Old English, yeah, Chaucer's English, we wouldn't understand it, and they wouldn't have a clue what we were talking about. Um, yeah, apart from the fact we would be accused of being spies or something like that, we could have quite easily come from yeah. Um, yeah, it's always an interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, compromise as well, and even the way people look. Yeah, I mean, with you and I have probably got foreign influences in us from even Elizabethan times. Yeah. Um, we don't know, yeah, our family history and everything. You're probably whiter than I am when I look at you. Um, but we've got yeah, we probably, yeah, behave differently. We certainly have different attitudes. Um, and notions and everything else. I mean, yeah, it's like if we did travel back in time, I'm getting away from films there, but I've seen this used in it. I mean, one film I did see actually was called The Final Countdown, where they had a 1980s American aircraft carrier accidentally get transported back to just before Pearl Harbor. Yeah, talking about that. Fascinating film to watch if you ever get it. The Final Countdown. It did look at the history. Okay, there are a few loose ends in it, and yeah, plot plot holes, as they call it, about it all. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. How would a modern aircraft carrier be viewed going back then? Um, and I think the captain made it actually a decision, which was the right decision at the time. But I'm not going to explain what that is. You watch the film. Obviously, twists and turns on it. It was actually quite an interesting film, and again, it did actually do look at the history quite effectively. It was a good way of looking at the history and how we would view the times then, as you just said. And I've just thought of that. Yeah, obviously, I wasn't going to include every film I know, my preamble, I could think of. But yeah, so some good examples. Yeah, I've just thought it's quite an interesting thing to think about. Having read a few things recently, and like you say, with certain characters being transplanted into things for notions and ideas, but that's probably always happened as well. That's probably not you. Possibly even Shakespeare did that.
Well,
To
I know
to
that
play a modern audience.
yeah, Shakespeare, women didn't act in Shakespeare. It was boys
Yeah.
to act in their place.
Well, that went through until Charles II's reign. Even then, they had the boys or men or boys acting women's parts. Although you did get female actresses at that time, I believe it had to be signed off to do it. But I mean, yeah, it was Nell Gwyn about at the time. Yeah, she's famous mistress of Charles II. She was an actress amongst other things and a businesswoman.